In 1977, the snow fell quietly over the small town of Aspen, Colorado. Inside the Pitkin County Courthouse, a man sat calmly at a wooden table, dressed in a crisp beige suit and wearing an expression that didn't match his circumstances. His name was Ted Bundy, and to most of the officers in the room, he didn't look like a killer. He was polite, articulate, even charming. But beneath that calm face was a mind that refused to be confined. Bundy had already been charged with several brutal crimes in other states, but here in Colorado, he was representing himself in court. That was his advantage. By acting as his own attorney, he gained privileges no other inmate had: access to the law library, movement through certain unsecured areas, and time away from his cell. He used it carefully, like a chess player studying his opponent's next move. The guards had grown accustomed to him asking for legal books. They didn't notice how often his eyes drifted to the window. It was high, but not unreachable. The mountains behind it looked peaceful, their white peaks glistening under the winter sun. Bundy watched them for days, memorizing the patterns of the courthouse staff, their routines, their timing, their habits. He wasn't thinking about his defense anymore. He was planning something else entirely. The morning of June 7th began like any other. The courtroom was quiet. The judge hadn't arrived yet. A few deputies chatted near the door. Bundy sat at his table, flipping through pages of a law book. When no one was looking, he slipped into the empty law library next door. It was silent except for the ticking of a clock. The window was open just enough to let in a breeze. He looked around once, took a deep breath, and climbed onto a bookshelf. Then, with surprising ease, he pulled himself up and squeezed through the window. Outside, the world was bright and silent. He dropped to the ground 2 floors below, landing awkwardly but unhurt. For a moment, he stood still, adjusting his tie, brushing dust from his suit. No one shouted. No one saw him. Then he started walking, calmly at first, then faster. The street led into the woods, and within minutes, Ted Bundy had disappeared into the Colorado wilderness. When guards realized he was gone, chaos erupted. Deputies ran through the halls, shouting his name. Someone called for backup. Helicopters were dispatched. But Bundy was already several miles away, moving through thick forest and snow. For the first time in months, he was free. Night fell quickly in the mountains. Bundy wandered aimlessly, cold and hungry. He hadn't planned how he'd survive. He found an empty cabin, broke in, and took whatever food he could find. For 2 days, he stumbled through the rough terrain, following roads by moonlight and sleeping under trees. Eventually, exhaustion caught up to him. When police found him on the highway several days later, he was shivering, muddy, and smiling. His short-lived escape was over. But even as he was led back to his cell, handcuffed and silent, Bundy wasn't defeated. He had tested the limits and learned the system's weak points. Back in jail, he went right back to playing the role of the polite, intelligent inmate. Guards joked that he should have been a lawyer. They forgot that behind his smile was someone who saw confinement as a challenge, not a punishment. The failed escape only deepened his obsession with freedom. Months later, Bundy was moved to the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, a smaller facility with older cells. There, he observed everything: the guard schedules, the building's layout, the locks, even the size of the ceiling vent above his bed. He began exercising daily, doing push-ups and crunches to lose weight. At night, while the others slept, he quietly unscrewed the light fixture and studied the vent's bolts. The guards liked him. He was always polite, rarely caused trouble. They let him keep books, pencils, and even magazines in his cell. What they didn't know was that Bundy had started chipping away at the ceiling vent with a stolen hacksaw blade, bit by bit, hiding the damage with cardboard and dust. As Christmas approached, most of the staff grew relaxed. The jail was quiet. Bundy's charm had worked again. No one suspected what he was planning. He had been carefully hoarding money sent by friends and supporters who still believed in his innocence. He used it to buy small items, snacks, and eventually clothing that he would wear once free. Every night, he rehearsed his route in his mind, up through the vent, across the ceiling, down into the jailer's apartment. One cold night, he stood on his bed, reached up, and pushed the vent aside. The opening was small, too small for most people. But Bundy had been starving himself for weeks to make his body thin enough. He squeezed through, pulling his arms and shoulders in tightly. Above the cell was a maze of dark crawlspaces filled with dust and pipes. The metal groaned softly under his weight. For an hour, he crawled quietly through the ceiling, moving toward the light that came from the jailer's apartment. Below him, guards talked and laughed, unaware that the most wanted man in America was inches above their heads. When he finally dropped down into the apartment, the floor creaked but no one heard. The apartment was empty. The jailer's family was away for the night. Bundy looked around, wiping dust from his clothes. On the table lay a set of civilian clothes neatly folded. He changed quickly, combed his hair, and stood in front of the mirror. For a moment, he smiled faintly at his reflection. Then he walked out the front door of the jail and into the freezing Colorado night. No alarms, no shouting, no chaos. He simply vanished. Hours later, when the guards checked his cell for morning count, they found it empty. The vent was open, the bed neatly made. At first, they thought it was a mistake. Maybe a transfer, maybe confusion. But then they looked up and saw the hole in the ceiling. Panic spread instantly. Every roadblock in the area was activated. Helicopters filled the sky again. But by then, Ted Bundy was already gone, far beyond their reach. For the next several days, he moved quietly through Colorado, using stolen cars and abandoned cabins to hide. He read newspapers about his own escape, laughing at how the authorities underestimated him. He knew they'd search nearby states, but he had a different plan. He wanted to disappear completely, to start over somewhere new. By January, Bundy had driven south, across multiple states, until he reached Florida. There, under a new name and a stolen identity, he blended into the crowds of college students and tourists. No one recognized him. He rented a small room, spent days on the beach, and lived as if he had never been caught. But behind that calm surface, the same darkness waited, patient and ready. The Night Ted Bundy Escaped was not just a story of one man's cleverness. It was a failure of a system that believed intelligence meant harmlessness. Bundy's charm had blinded everyone around him, and his escape marked the beginning of his most violent chapter yet. The calm voice that once quoted legal terms had turned into silence before another storm. The year was 1978. The air in Florida was warm, humid, and heavy with the smell of the sea. It had been just 2 weeks since Ted Bundy had crawled through the ceiling of his Colorado cell and vanished into the night. Across the country, newspapers called it the perfect escape. But in Tallahassee, nobody knew his name yet. Bundy had arrived under a new identity, Chris Hagen, a soft-spoken man with good manners and a disarming smile. He rented a small room at a boarding house near Florida State University. The people there thought he was just another quiet tenant. He read magazines in the living room, sometimes borrowed a bicycle to ride around the neighborhood. No one suspected that the polite stranger with the neat hair and calm voice was one of America's most wanted fugitives. But Bundy's calm never lasted long. His need for control, for dominance, it was like an itch that reason couldn't scratch. Late one night, January 14, 1978, the streets of Tallahassee were silent. Inside the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, most of the girls were asleep after a long Saturday night. At 2:45 a.m., a shadow crossed the front lawn. The back door was unlocked. Bundy slipped inside. What happened next would shock the entire nation. Within minutes, he attacked 4 young women in their sleep. 2 of them, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, would never wake up again. 2 others survived, beaten but alive. Bundy left the house in silence, his footsteps light against the tiled floor. As he walked away, he passed a police officer's patrol car parked only a block away. The officer never knew the killer was right there, walking calmly into the dark. In the following days, the city of Tallahassee went into a state of panic. Police locked down the university. Students slept in groups, doors bolted, lights on. The newspapers described the killer as phantom-like, someone who attacked and vanished before anyone could react. But Bundy wasn't finished. A few weeks later, he struck again, abducting and murdering 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her school in Lake City, Florida. It was his final known crime. From that moment on, the manhunt for Ted Bundy became one of the largest in U.S. history. Posters with his face were pinned across every state. Roadblocks were set up. His photo was shown on national television. But Bundy had a gift, the ability to blend in anywhere. He stole cars, switched license plates, and moved from town to town like a ghost. Still, every road he took seemed to close behind him. On February 15, 1978, in Pensacola, Florida, at 1:30 in the morning, a patrol officer named David Lee noticed a suspicious orange Volkswagen Beetle driving erratically. He pulled the car over. The driver looked tired, pale, but oddly calm. When asked for ID, he smiled and said his name was Kenneth Meisner. But when Officer Lee ran the name, it didn't match. Then Bundy lunged. He fought with the officer, clawing and kicking, desperate to escape. The struggle spilled onto the road. Eventually, Officer Lee overpowered him, handcuffed him, and pulled him to his feet. When he searched the car, he found stolen credit cards, fake IDs, and dark gloves. At the station, the man sat in silence. When asked for his real name, he smirked and said softly, "I guess you got me." It was Ted Bundy, captured once again. His face was on every screen in America the next day. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. The handsome killer, as they called him, smiled and waved to cameras during his trial. He enjoyed the attention, even as the evidence against him grew overwhelming. In July 1979, Ted Bundy was found guilty of the Chi Omega murders. The jury recommended the death penalty. 2 years later, he was convicted again for the murder of Kimberly Leach, another death sentence. Still, Bundy kept manipulating the system. He studied law, filed appeals, even got married during trial proceedings to a woman named Carol Ann Boone, all to delay his execution. The nation watched him turn his trial into a stage performance, confident, charming, unbothered. But the end was inevitable. By January 1989, all appeals had failed. Outside Florida State Prison, crowds gathered, some holding candles, others holding signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn." On the morning of January 24th, at 7:16 a.m., Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair. Witnesses said the sky outside was gray, and when the switch was flipped, a cheer erupted from the crowd outside the gates. Reporters later wrote that the crowd celebrated like it was a festival. Bundy's body was taken away quietly, but his story didn't end there. His charm, his manipulation, and his terrifying dual life changed how America viewed evil itself. He wasn't the monster in the shadows. He was the man who smiled at you in daylight. For decades, people would study him, psychologists, detectives, even filmmakers, trying to understand how someone could look so normal and hide such darkness. Ted Bundy's story became more than a crime. It became a mirror, a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it wears a smile.